All right. Sorry for that awkward pause. We were waiting for our video intro for our audience at home, but it seems to not be working, so sorry for that, and we'll just get started right here. I'm Ben Bergman, KPCC business reporter. This is Chris Farrell, and I've done a couple of these events. This is the first one that is standing room only, so it's really cool that everyone showed up, and of course all the people watching at home as well. And I just wanted to start out by reading a couple facts to sort of get our conversation on unretirement going. And this one caught me. According to a survey by Walton Wyatt Worldwide, half of workers over 50 plan to work past age 65, and a third of respondents had increased their retirement age in the last year. That fact was from one of our panelist books, Helen Dennis, and so is this next fact. Today, only 41% of non-retired Americans expect they will have enough money in retirement to live comfortably, compared to 59% in 2002. And this notion about unretirement is not just about people in their 60s and 70s. It's really about a lot of people in their 80s, too, as you wrote about, Chris, in your book. Some examples which quickly came to my mind. Dianne Feinstein, oldest U.S. senator, but there's a lot of people very close to her. She's 81. And our junior senator, Barbara Boxer, is retiring, but Senator Feinstein is going to keep going. If you saw American Sniper recently, that was directed by Clint Eastwood. He's 84. Betty White is in her 6th season of Hot in Cleveland, 93. And I've had the privilege of interviewing Vin Scully, who just defies age and still has his fastball, as they always say, as sharp as ever. He is 87. Next season, he's going to do his 66th season calling Dodger games. So all something for us to aspire to still be going that strong when we're 87. He's slightly cutting back his schedule next year because last season he did all road games outside of Arizona, but this year he's only going to go to Anaheim and San Francisco. So a few less games, but still that's about 80 games a year. And then I think about my own dad, who is 82. He officially retired as a pediatrician when he was 77, but still pretty much works full time. He's a lobbyist trying to get better healthcare treatment for mentally ill, and he also advises pediatric residents. So certainly no retiring in my family, Chris. No. But Janice gave a brief introduction to Chris, but I'll just add a few things. As she said, economics contributor at Marketplace has been for a long time. He's also contributing editor at Business Week magazine. He was host and executive editor of public television's Right on the Money. And his other books include Right on the Money, Taking Control of Your Personal Finances, and Deflation, What Happens When Prices Fall. Chris went to Stanford and the London School of Economics. And Chris, you have quite a story about how you paid for your education at the London School of Economics. Just briefly tell our audience that.
So when I graduated from college, I went to sea for 4 years, and I worked on a container ship and on tankers. And when you're at sea, you work 7 days a week, because there's really nothing else to do, and you work 12 hours a day. And we didn't get paid that much, but over time, you actually made a fair amount of money. And one of the things I learned, one of the main lessons I learned, was do not play poker with older sea dogs, because you will lose. It's guaranteed. Anyway, I took all my savings, and what I would do is that I would save everything I made at sea, and then I'd go ashore, and I'd get a job waiting tables. I worked for a professor, and I would spend everything that I made ashore. Took my money, went to the London School of Economics, and I had a budget. I had it figured out. It was going to be fine. And this was when Blumenthal was Treasury Secretary, Carter was president, and the dollar reached an all-time low against the British pound. And 4 years before the mast, I barely crawled back to New York. I made it, but barely. And I got fascinated in economics. And that was the beginning of my economics career as far as becoming a journalist.
Not your typical path. Well, before we get into unretirement, let's talk for a moment about retirement. The word means withdrawal.
Withdrawal.
And it's the retirement as we think about it now, or at least used to think about it, is pretty new.
It's very new. I mean, we all have a very powerful image. But retirement, if you think about most of history, most people worked pretty close to dying, right? I mean, that was the base, except for the very wealthy. The wealthy could retire, the wealthy could live a life of leisure. But for the average person, they would work, and then they would work into their older age, and then they would pretty much pass away. And then we had this remarkable thing. So Social Security in 1935, and then you had Medicare in 1965, and in the post-World War II era, the rise of the defined benefit, that traditional pension plan, plus it was the golden era of just economic growth. And so for the first time in history, the mass of Americans, a large group of people, could embrace leisure. And so that's the whole period. We moved to Sun City in Arizona, the whole thing in Florida, and it was an incredible thing. And it's such a powerful image. And yet, it's about it really has been changing dramatically since about the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. That was kind of the period of transition. And as we'll be talking about, people started to embrace working longer. But the image that we have is a very brief period of time.
So what were the main reasons for that change beginning in the 1980s?
So I think that there are a couple of reasons. I mean, part of it is, it's like when you try something new and it's really exciting and it's really different and everyone jumps into it. And then what a lot of people gradually learned, if you think about your lives and your work lives, the ups and downs, but over time you get a lot of experience, you get knowledge, you get skill. And the idea that people would just walk away from that they would just stop. And a lot of people decided they didn't want to do that. Plus, the baby boomer generation is a well-educated generation. It's healthier than previous generations. And so gradually there was a dissatisfaction that emerged. Plus, we are living longer. So if you 1935, when Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act, average life expectancy, rounding it off, was about 62 years. Rounding it off now, it's about 79 years. And so, people are better educated, they're healthier, work is important. And the other thing that I think has grown, or the recognition has grown, is that work is a social institution. It's a place where someone has a baby, you're happy. Someone's going through a divorce, you help them through it. There's a lot of gossip. It's just, there's a lot of conversation. The whole thing about, people standing around the water cooler. Well, that's healthy, actually, because this is part of what we are. You feel connected. And when you look at the surveys of people who are retired and they look back, and the surveys say, what do you most miss about your pre-retirement years? And, I would assume it would be income. But number one on the list is your colleagues, the connections. Income's in there, by the way. But number one is these connections.
So this notion of unretirement, how much of it is necessity? You need more money because there's not as much in your 401k, and the stock market for a long time was disappointing, and how much of it is just you want to work?
Yes. So it's both.
Okay.
And, and it's a spectrum. I mean, so if you look at, the household finances of unretirement, the household finances of continuing to work is actually quite powerful, the impact. And part of it is, even if you're earning a slim part-time income, that's going to dwarf what most of us can make off our 403B or our 401k, even a really good year like last year. If you look at your portfolio, you make a part-time income in your unretirement years, it's going to be a lot more. And then what that allows is you might be able to continue to save, or at least you're not tapping into your retirement savings. And then probably the most important thing for the average person, the typical worker, is that working longer allows you to delay taking Social Security. And so your Social Security benefit, if you file at age 70 versus age 62, is more than 75% larger. So the economics, sort of the personal finances, are powerful. And then I think there are other things that work in terms of your health, staying active, using your mind, getting up in the morning. Someone, has expectations of you. If you think about work, a lot of it, you're still always learning some sort of new technology. You're kind of always going, oh, you got to learn something new. So, you're using your mind, and that is also a big impact.
But this is probably going to come up again. You were on our show, Take Two, this morning
Yes.
with A. Martinez, and A was sort of like, wait a minute, I've been looking to forward to retirement my whole life. Like, why do I need to unretire now? Like, Because a lot of people do. They just want to stop working and retire.
But here's the thing. If you look at the data, what happens and what it shows is that even though we have this powerful image about retirement, you stop working, and you embrace leisure. And that's our dominant image. And it's, if you look at the ads, right, it's always somebody on a golf course. But if you look in the data, that person's on the golf course is coming from a part-time job, a bridge job, starting their own business. And so I think, we don't have a good narrative. We don't have a good story how to describe it, because economics and personal finance is really about, it's creating a narrative. And so we have a narrative about when you work longer, you worked until you died. That was up until the 1920s, 1930s. Then we have this narrative of you retire, you go to Sun City, or you just stop working. So what's the narrative? What's the story? What's the picture that we have in our minds with people in unretirement? And we're doing all kinds of things. It's part-time work, it's flexible work, it's temp work, it's starting your own business. And it's really, the way to think, this is the Baby Boomer Retirement Improv Act. And if you've ever done improv, you also know sometimes you really fall flat on your face. This is a giant experiment. And that is both exciting and it's also very scary.
Well, aside from just the trend of retirement changing, there's also a lot more people who are older in this country. You talk about
$10,000, 10,000 boomers a day turning 65.
And you have some vivid imagery about, the number of states that this would take up. It's amazing.
Absolutely. So yes, this is, the baby boom generation is a very large generation, and it's not all about them, but right now it largely is. And the baby boom generation is living longer, and it's an exciting period of time. And one of the things about this that I think to keep in mind is that the baby boomers are doing an improv act. They are doing an experimentation. And we don't really know how this is going to work out. So the real beneficiary of this period of time is my 22-year-old. So my 22-year-old is in his 50s, is in his 60s. He's going to have an image. He's going to know what this means. This rethinking, this reimagining of the last third of life, that's the real impact of what's going on right now. And with the nature of the experimentation, as I say, some of it's not going to work out. But by the time the 20-year-olds are nearing their retirement age, they're going to have a very different image and very different expectation and a very different narrative of what is the last third of life.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the 22-year-old, because this comes up a lot, that the 22-year-old baseball announcer says, well, maybe Vin Scully should retire because he's taking my spot, or the young director wants Clint Eastwood to retire. So there's this very common perception that by staying in jobs longer, older people are taking jobs from younger people trying to get into the workplace.
So, no. And the economists call this the lump of labor theory. And we all have this image that the job market is a zero-sum game, right? So if you have more older workers working, that means there has to be less opportunity for the younger workers. And, in a particular company, that can be really true. You have a stagnant company. And what happens in a stagnant company is the older workers stay because they're trying to hold on. And the younger workers, the ones that can, they flee as fast as possible. So you can have that kind of a situation. But in an economy, the image is not a zero-sum game. It's not a fixed pie. It is growing over time. And the analogy that I would use, and it looks like at least some of you in the audience remember, think about some of the discussions and the op-ed pages that were going on about the women's movement in the early 1980s. And there was this whole discussion that, all these professional women coming in meant that there was just less opportunity for men. What were men going to do? So what happened is the pie got bigger. The pie got a lot bigger. More than 30% of the growth of the U.S. economy, to a large extent, is accounted by women coming into the workforce. And so I think it's the exact same thing. Older workers and younger workers are both tied to the economy. And if the economy is growing and we're generating jobs, then it turns out that both are getting jobs. So the more jobs that older workers have, it turns out more jobs the younger workers have, and vice versa.
And this goes to another point, is you say there is a lot of age discrimination.
Pervasive.
In the workplace.
Age discrimination is absolutely real. You cannot get around that in the sense of it exists. It's real. It's something to confront. It's one of the reasons why, when you think about entrepreneurship, we all, or at least I do, think about Mark Zuckerberg, right? Entrepreneurship is for young people, Silicon Valley, for an earlier generation, Bill Gates and the late Steve Jobs. But when you look at entrepreneurship and new business formation, in 2013, 23% of all new businesses were formed by the 55 to 64 years age group. And that's up from
incredible.
14%.
You don't ever hear about that.
No, and that's up from 14% in 1996. And I think part of the reason is people have a dream, and you're getting older. And if you have this dream and you want to start this business, you better go do it. But also part of it is age discrimination. So a lot of this that's going on, a lot of the discussion is one of the big benefits that an older worker has is their network. And more than 50% of all jobs come through a network. Because a network doesn't care about your age. They know you. They know your character. They know what you can do. And so there is a lot of networking going on. There's a lot of experimentation going on. There's a lot of starting your own business. But you can't minimize the role of age discrimination. It's just that you can't accept it either. You have to just plow through it. And that's what a lot of people are doing.
But what else? What should you do aside from a lawsuit or?
Well, I'm all in favor of lawsuits because the lawsuits is one of the ways. I mean that is how we attack it. It's also how it's very important that society's expectations change. I mean, think about it. One of the most widespread prejudice, stereotypes in our society is that older workers aren't creative. They're stuck in their way. You just won't. Gray hair and creativity, that's an oxymoron. Now, if you go to New York City and you go to the Museum of Modern Art, there's an incredible exhibit there, and it's by Matisse, and it's his cutouts. And most people think that Matisse's cutouts is the absolute height of his creativity. So he did that basically between the ages of 74 and 84, which is when he died. And, so there's a Matisse. Okay, he's an exception. But then all of a sudden you start going through all the artists, and a lot of lawyers, business people, skilled workers. I mean, you start thinking about it, and all of a sudden you realize, boy, you know what? There's an awful lot of remarkables out there. And so part of this, and I think part of the next 3 decades, part of this improv act, part of this experimentation is going to be breaking down the barriers. These barriers are stereotypes. Because, the thing is, if you were creative in your 20s, you're going to be creative in your 60s, right? And that's the basic story. But we need to break down the barriers. We need to break down the stereotypes on a practical level. What people do is they take advantage of who they know. They take advantage of their network at work. They take advantage of their network elsewhere. And there are certain sectors of the economy that are far more accepting of an older worker. So if you think about a lot of the jobs, we're not having this conversation in the 1950s when the commanding heights of the economy was smokestack America. We're having this conversation when social services like healthcare and education and information technologies are much more dominant. So it's one thing to say, you're going to be working longer if you're going from working in a major metropolitan hospital in downtown Los Angeles, and now you're going to shift to a medical clinic versus, hey, I was working in a factory and now I'm going to go into a mine.
A lot of your book is about entrepreneurship. I mean, aside from the networks that you've mentioned, which are so important, what other factors make older people such good entrepreneurs?
Well, they have a lot of skill. They have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of experience. And if you think, why does a company hire someone to work with them? It's because you're going to solve a problem. And so a lot of it that's going on is you realize that you can solve someone's problem. And in today's world, it's also a lot cheaper to start your own business. A lot of this is happening out of the home. There's a really fascinating trend where we're starting to see a lot more, once again, multi-generational entrepreneurship, where aging boomers with their younger children are coming together and they're creating their own business. And it's kind of a really fascinating interchange of experience and knowledge with some hustle and some high technology, and it's very. And then the thing is, the business will be left to the younger generation. But it's at its core, it's cheaper to start a business today. Now, a lot of this is what we call, a Schedule C business, right? You're self-employed, maybe one or two other people, maybe an informal partnership. But again, you're tapping into what your knowledge and your experience is, and so that's where a lot of this business formation is going on.
And we usually think of tech incubators as the sort of thing you see in the HBO show Silicon Valley, of all these barely college kids sitting around eating cereal. But you actually visited a tech incubator in Detroit. It was called Tech Town.
Yes, and it's a great incubator, and it's a wonderful building. So I think it's like a 5-story white building, and I just love the symbolism of it. And it's where Alfred Kahn, he was one of the great factory architects of Detroit, mostly for Ford, but for a number of them. And he built this factory for Pontiac, and it's where they would create a lot of the concept cars. And they also worked on the Corvette there. And it has now been transformed. You walk in, it's like almost a Silicon Valley with all the cubicles, and it's got the conference rooms, and it's a lot of people who are there starting their own business, and about half are in their sort of 50s. And one of the women that I interviewed, she'd been human resources in Eastern Michigan. Her husband was entrepreneurial, and they really wanted to start a business, both to work together, but also to help revive Detroit and downtown Detroit. So they created a coffee shop. Coffee shop still, the bottom line coffee shop, still in business. In the first year, their son was the manager. And that's the kind of energy that I saw there, but it was very striking. Half were in their 50s, but again, you think about it, there's a little bit of capital, there's a little bit of experience, you might have some assets, but they really also had an idea about what they wanted to do.
Well, one of those people who has stepped away and started a second career is Ysabel Duron, who is our second panelist, and I want to bring her up along with our third panelist, Helen Dennis, and we will continue our conversation here.
I came loaded with notes.
Yes. So it's really an all-star panel tonight. I'll just briefly introduce our two other panelists. Ysabel was a television journalist for more than 40 years, but she stepped away from the anchor desk last year to focus full-time on her encore career. We're going to talk more about that in a second. She founded Latinas Contra Cancer in 2003 to address a void in services helping Latinos dealing with cancer. Duron is herself a cancer survivor and was inducted into the National Association of Hispanic Journalists Hall of Fame in 2009. So please give her a warm welcome. And we also have Helen Dennis with us. She is a nationally recognized leader on issues of aging, employment, and retirement. She's the editor of 2 books on aging and writes a weekly column on successful aging for the Daily Breeze newspapers. She's also a part-time lecturer at USC's School of Gerontology, where she teaches the Retirement 2.0, preparing for a new life stage. And she was a delegate to the 2005 White House Conference on Aging. So please welcome Helen as well.
Thank you.
So Ysabel, we've been talking about sort of in the abstract people starting these encore careers, these second careers, and let's also hear about it from you. When did you decide that you wanted to start your encore career?
Long before I retired.
Okay.
And in fact, I think it was sort of serendipitous because I was diagnosed with cancer. And this was when I was 52 years old. And so my first question was, okay, God, this isn't about dying. What's the point? And the second question was, should I do a story? So I did a 3-part series. It won some awards. But what it did was it launched me as this cancer poster child, and I was recruited by some women saying, look, there's a group of Latinas over here. They're helping some low-income Spanish-speaking women with breast cancer. I can't tell them what to do because I'm a white woman. You go tell them how they should succeed. So I went in and sat down and listened to them, and having sat on enough boards, et cetera, I said, well, I think you're doing great work. You're going to probably grow. Your services are going to be needed, but to do so, you're going to need money. To get money, you're going to have to become a 501c3. So that's what I suggest for you. Bye. You know? And they talked about it for a couple of months. I walked out of the room, and they elected me president. So I started on this path 2 years after my own diagnosis, and said, well, I know how to do this. No business plan, just some sheer audacity and a desire to do good. So I built that and then a second nonprofit, Latinas Contra Cancer, over these past 12 years. So I had already been, in an entrepreneurial spirit. I wasn't thinking about retiring. That was...
Why not?
It's not in my DNA. And the whole, I told you, I think I've said to Chris, we have to change the word. It no longer suits. I mean, you like to say unretirement, right? But I think the word itself no longer suits. Withdrawal. I think that we, and particularly the baby boomer, are really interested in engagement. And they want to do something with their lives. And let me read you 3 little things, because I love these. From the Dowager of Downton Abbey: the nature of life is not permanence, but flux. Imagine this in a British accent. This one I love. Don't die with your best music in you. This comes from a book called Growing Up Poor is Bad for the Brain. And then there was this. I heard this in a discussion. The first 50 years of your life are just preparation for the work you have to do in the next 50 years of your life. And imagine in reality, and Chris mentions it, we're all getting prepped. We're learning. We're becoming skilled. And then we go and retire. We withdraw. We take all that with us. And the whole thing about what was called my encore career, or my second act, and there's a huge movement around it, was the fact that I stayed engaged and I created something entrepreneurial, and it was doing good work. And so the only good thing about it was that I was able to transition out of television, and I'm going to claim it's 43 years, not 40 years. I earned every gray hair I have. And the only reason why I left television, because I loved being a journalist, was because it was not what I started with. It was not the kind of journalism that I love. And I worked in a San Francisco television station for 23 years. So I said, I'm going to take what I know, I'm going to take my energy, and I'm going to put it to work full-time at Latinas Contra Cancer, where I'm doing something of value and where I feel valued. And I think that that is what I think counts really for a lot of boomers. They don't want to retire. They want to do something of value with their lives. They want to have, what was it, Encore.Corps says, don't leave your legacy, live your legacy. And I think that all of us have that. Is this it? Is that all there is in my life? And so that's how it evolved for me. So it wasn't A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3 kind of choice. It evolved. The difference was, and Helen might even agree, you have to hear. You have to listen. You have to know it's calling you, instead of expecting it to come tap you on the shoulder and say, ho-ho, this is what we're going to do with your life. You have to know it in here. And I think that's what makes the difference in a way that you will choose something that really makes you happy.
Well, you mentioned a moment ago that we need a different word than retirement. And Helen, you've actually written about some other possible terms we could use, like rewirement or life 2.0 or aspirement.
The word is a problem. One of the words we came up with in this whole renewment, small movement, was because a group of women got together, professional women, and said, it doesn't feel right, it's not comfortable. So we made up a word called renewment, which is a cross between retirement and renewal, suggesting it's a time of opportunity, of choice, of freedom, and that we aren't responding necessarily to what the boss wants or what society wants, that you're really kind of true to yourself, your own calling. So the word is a problem. I'm not sure the word is going to go away. I think what Chris has done is branded something which is comfortable, unretirement. And marketers say if something doesn't have a name, it doesn't exist. So you have coined a business of unretirement because you didn't get rid of the word, so people know what you're talking about. So I think that's a big plus to the field. But yeah, language is tricky. I'm going to add another little piece to the language. People put a hand on my shoulder and say, "Are you still working? Oh, are you still running? Now, do you still do yoga?" There is this expectation at a certain life stage that you don't do the things which people associate with younger people. And the media is getting a little better, but when you read anything online or in a book or a journal, look at the operative word "still," because it really implies you're better than most people. I didn't expect someone your age to do all that. So language is very powerful.
And you guys are all on Twitter, so there you go.
And one of the things that I think is very exciting about this is that this really is, this really is a movement. There really is something going on. And I remember Thomas Wolfe called boomers the me generation. And what is happening is the me generation has become the us generation. And throughout the country, there are grassroots movements, there are nonprofit organizations, there's academic institutions, there's all kinds of activity going on that you meet people and they're having this conversation. And I think, it is about, what do I want to do next? And it's not about, now it's time for me to, retire and go out to pasture. But we're all having this conversation, trying to help each other out, figure out what is this thing, what is this next stage?
And we've used this word encore career, which you wrote a column about. That's a specific thing. Will you explain that?
That really comes out of the work of Mark Friedman and his organization, encore.org. And it's looking at the second half of life and embracing purpose, passion, and for some, a paycheck. But the critical part is for the greater good. It's a time to take what you have and give back in a meaningful way. And that is a movement. And it is growing, and a very important one. But beyond that, at least for me, it's the encore career, but it's the concept of encore. There is something else out there. You may not be able to define it, but it's a concept, it's an attitude. And people like the word. They like encore better than retirement. I'm in the encore phase of my life, as opposed to I'm in retirement.
Or the second act.
The second act is also a great one. It's a great one.
And for those of you, you've got some great books out on the table, but in case you're interested, Marcy Albahar, who is part of the Encore movement, wrote this book called the Encore Career Handbook. So it's got all those great tips in case you're interested in looking and learning about the Encore movement. They sort of dragged me into it. That's how they gave me a little prize for my work, and suddenly I'm this expert on aging, right? I said, I'm not aging. What the heck are you guys talking about, But one of the things, because I do work at the cancer arena, I also recognize that healthy minds and healthy bodies go together. And one of the things the science is proving more and more and more, and I pull this thing out of Duke University, How to Live a Longer, Healthier Life is the title, but living a purposeful life is a predictor of healthy aging. So the more we use our minds and the more social we are, the less isolated, the more engaged, the more we feel valued. I think those are the things that add to that recipe for that long, successful aging. So, and I think that boomers are interested in staying healthy. You're still running, but there's a great deal of concern about healthy aging, especially with the cost of health care. And so that's a whole other value and a whole other payoff for you, that not only are you healthy in mind, but you're healthy in body. One of the other sides of this coin is that, unfortunately, to some extent, the Encore movement is seen as an elitist movement for people who can afford to retire, because there are people working in this country today who will never be able to afford to retire, or who will never have the benefits that Social Security gives some of us, that allows them to retire comfortably. There are people who have worked for years in this country who don't have 401ks. And so there is an opportunity actually for people giving back to bring those folks forward. to help those who cannot help themselves just because of this. There's opportunity and there's entrepreneurial opportunity to do things. But I do believe that as we talk about this movement, we need to bring a lot of people forward with it and not leave everybody behind who can't afford to do this encore, this retirement or unretirement, but to be very smart about it.
If I can just comment on, I think this is a cohort, a group that is invisible. Financial planners in general can't make money from this group. And I think there's certain assumptions made about low-income people that they can't save, they're not interested in the future. And I'm going to give the short story. I have a house helper, second grade education. She has 3 businesses, Mary Kay, housekeeping, and gold. She has an accountant who never told her about an IRA. Okay, so how many times, I mean, the assumption one makes. So I think we have to look at the assumptions we make about low-income individuals. And my dream would be that all financial services would do what the law firms do, that in your performance review, you get credit for pro bono work and reach out to a community. So I agree with you, it's important.
And the other thing I would add is, one of the things that the optimism that I have about the unretirement movement is it's going to create a lot of income, a lot of wealth, generate more taxes. And so as more and more people work longer, embrace working longer, whatever sort of form or fashion that shows up to, a lot of it's going to be part-time work. It means that for those who are truly suffering, who have worked in a low-income job and never had an employer-sponsored health care plan, never had an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan, and have done the kind of work where mentally and physically they are truly burned out. We will be generating so much wealth that we can increase, their income. We can increase their standard of living. And so I think that actually is part of what's going on here, is that the opportunities that are being created by the unretirement movement actually really reduce a lot of the things that we worry about. Of course, there's politics, and you have to do something with it, but nonetheless, the wealth that will be created by an aging population really provides the wherewithal to deal with those who have been left behind and that the system has not worked for.
Do you guys agree with that? It's sort of a trickle-down argument.
Oh, I agree, and the whole term, a new term, the longevity economy.
Yes.
Okay, is a whole new look at that. But in addition, and maybe this is a parallel thought, there are many individuals who will not be able to afford, and there should be some way that we could bring them along. Yeah. But definitely, I think there is. But I think in the meantime, until all that happens, Chris, until we put more money into the economy and those services, there is a whole generation that's not going to benefit. So I think we still have a challenge. If I can add just a different kind of challenge without digressing too far.
Ysabel, did you want to add
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, let her finish her thought, and then
Okay.
maybe I'll go off on another digression.
It's another. I think, one book and one organization and one professional can't meet all of the needs at the same time. And I think one of our challenges with the Encore movement, in addition to Marcy's fabulous book, is that we have probably more of a supply of folks saying, hey, I'm aware of this sounds exciting, and they don't know where to go with it.
Yeah.
So I think we have a job to empower people, number one, to be their own advocate, sell yourself as an Encore careerist, help give them the tools to do it. And on the other side, we have to do a lot of education on the demand side to know what to do with this talent. I mean, the typical thing, someone wants to volunteer, and maybe they're going to be assigned to something that's not rewarding. As you mentioned, boomers want more. I want it to be meaningful, to be impactful. So we have work to do with those who, with the supply side, both nonprofit and for-profit. So I think those are some of our challenges ahead of us.
And that also feeds into, I mean, part of where I do think that this is a long-term story is it also has to affect corporate benefits. in organizational benefits and how organizations think about the workers. And you're seeing in certain parts of the economy, Intel, for example, or IBM, where there's sort of they deal in markets where there's very low unemployment. And also Herman Miller, again, made in America, and has a very strong incentive to keep its factory worker there. Coming up with benefits that encourage this encore career, encourage working longer. And there's a lot of discussion about it, but just in case you didn't realize, we've gone through a really bad time. And so, but the thing is, no matter what companies say, if they don't have to do anything, they don't really do it. But now as the unemployment rate is dropping, as the economy is getting a little bit stronger, I think you're going to see some more activity in terms on the corporate benefit side that is also going to provide more ramps for people to make a choice. Because right now, it's too much a DIY movement, right? It's too much what I have, what I'm going to do. And for most of us, we need some institutional support. We need some sort of roadmap.
You probably are aware that the feds are going in that direction.
Yes.
Because
right?
they, in fact, they've got all of these career workers who are about to retire and taking with them a huge amount of skill sets. And so they're encouraging a new model by keeping them on part-time to train the person who's going to take their place, which at some point in time sounded very horrible, right? I'm training this guy to take my place. But these are people who are willing and able and ready. They're looking towards this retirement, but in the meantime, they're not being shoved out the door at 55 or whatever time arrives in the federal government when you're supposed to get the heck out. So I think that if this model works, then it will be a model for the rest of industry.
That's right.
That this is the way we need to graciously treat our older workforce, because we can keep those skills working for us for a longer time. They can teach the younger workforce better habits and pass on those skills, and I think that's a great model. I now will digress, because I wanted to pick up the issue again to some extent. In the Latino community and in the African American community, you have a large population of people who either are poor or moderate income. I think I was looking at some statistics in the Pew Hispanic trends, and you look at a lot of Latinos who were just moderately okay, lost 50% of anything of wealth they had during these last tight years. In fact, they said they were left owning a car because they lost homes and a lot of other upward movement economically in our style. So when you look at the statistics, at least 50% of them make $50,000 and less. So, and yet it's a young population. Latinos are not monolithic. Chris was here when I said this. In case you thought we're not. Some of us dance salsa and some of us eat salsa. And there are those of us who multitask and do both. But the fact is that there are different cultural values they bring to the whole idea of volunteering, and but they're very entrepreneurial. The fastest growing small business is being started by Latino women. So, but the fact is they're also a young population. We don't have as many seniors. We have a large population of young people. The average age of the American, the mainstream population is like 32, and for Latinos it's 27. So, as I said, that population is going to be taking care of us when we become that generation that no longer can work and needs caretaking. So it behooves those of us who can do things entrepreneurially, start organizations, bring people forward, is to make sure that this population and low-income African Americans are indeed brought forward, trained, educated, so they can take the places, because it's going to be a majority-minority population in this country, a minority-majority population in this country, and we need them to be part of the discussion and be equally engaged. And I think that this is the way one can look back and pull forward in your communities, and particularly in Los Angeles, where you have this humongous Latino population that could use a partnership with all of you who want to get engaged.
And Helen, you also wrote about how there's differences in how men and women retire.
Yes, they have a lot in common. But I've worked with about 10,000 individuals in an educational setting, preparing some of it for their unretirement or some non-financial issues. Present men excluded, okay? Are you ready? At the risk of being sexist, men don't talk. That women tend to talk about the issues very freely and get to the difficult issues perhaps more quickly than men.
I never noticed.
That may change with men taking on a more nurturing role perhaps in the family. That may change. But women seem to get to the issues very quickly. And so we have these project renewment groups that have grown virally. There are about 30 that have grown virally across the country of career women, professional women getting together to talk about the issues. That may start for men, but that conversation may happen on the golf course maybe. I don't know, maybe at the gym, if it ever happens. But I can remember, and it was working with a group of physicians, when I brought up the issues of the next chapter, it was like a deer in headlights. They were great on the math. They did all the calculations with my PricewaterhouseCoopers colleagues, but absolutely blindsided in terms of what happens next. And I think there's certain careers where people are more connected to their work than others. And from my experience, certainly one is physicians, the other is the academics. Journalists, before journalism changed, if you worked for the Wall Street Journal, I mean, you died for them, right? Or the New York Times. And also I found railroad workers. Railroad workers believe that they made America great, and their father is there, and their aunt is there, and their son-in-law is there. Hard to leave the railroad industry. So it seems there's some industries where that connection is so deep and it's hard to leave. And it talks about issues of identity, and I'll stop at this point. The identity issue is really clear, and that's where the Encore career comes in. That's where continuing to work comes in. But who am I when I walk away from my work?
Exactly.
Where do I fit? How do people address me? You know, there's always, it's nice to meet you. So good to meet you. You're what do you do? When do you do it? What do you do? And people want to hear, this is the most fabulous time of life. They don't want to hear, I have no clue what I'm doing, you know. I don't know. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear that life is great.
Well, and it's funny she should say that, because I came into the airport and was right smack dab there outside security with two cops. And they said, aren't you on TV? Yeah, you know. I said, no, I retired 2 years ago. And they said, oh, how's that? You know. I said, well, unfortunately, I'm working harder now than when I was on television. But then I started talking to them. I said, well, I'm going down to talk on this radio program. How old are you guys? They're in their 40s. We've been talking about retiring. So it is well, for cops, maybe, huh? Let's get out of here while we're still alive. But the point is that this conversation is very deep. It's not just people, and you were talking about the radio guy who's still in his 40s, and he's already eager to retire, you know? And so I think that for me, it is very hard to walk away from that identity, because I was in Bay Area television of the 43 years, I was probably there 35. So a lot of people know me and ask me all the time about it. How's retirement, they want to know. Yeah. And I say, what retirement? But I also say, I don't like that word. It's not in my DNA. And then I probably disappoint them because they want me to say, oh, well, I've been to the Riviera 5 times or something like that. I don't know. But I am tied to that TV identity. I know that. You know, it's hard to walk away after 43 years.
Absolutely.
And so I am always, in some level, at performance. This for you, Ben. I'm always at performance.
So I want to try out an idea.
All right.
So off what both of you are saying. So academics and some lawyers, you know, there are certain people that get to take a sabbatical. And Mark Friedman of Encore.org has written very eloquently about, you know, the sabbatical, taking, you know, in your mid-50s, taking a year off and kind of thinking about what do you want to do next, you know, for the rest of your life. What are the opportunities that are there? And, of course, most of us go, a sabbatical, right? I can't afford a sabbatical. But if you think about what retirement is, actually what retirement is turning into is a sabbatical. So people stop working. But they actually end up going back to work within the first year or two. And so really they're not retiring.
And they intended to retire for the rest of their life?
Right. but they end up going back to work. So really what retirement has become is taking a sabbatical. It marks sort of like, so here's one phase, and now I'm going to kind of think about what I'm going to do next. But we're thinking we're retiring. But what happens is that people end up figuring out what else they want to do. All that opportunity, all that I'm still alive. I have this skill. I have this knowledge. I have this experience, and I'm going to take it to a different sector of the economy. And because I get that reassurance, because I'm using my knowledge and my skill. But boy, you go to a different sector of the economy. It's kind of fun. It gives you a little creative push. And I was out in Verrado, which is a new multi-generational complex outside of Phoenix. And this one guy got up and he said, Chris, here's the thing. Here's the thing about retirement. You have a cocktail at 4:30 in the afternoon, and it is wonderful. You're not worried about the boss. You're not worried about a meeting. You're not worried about a budget. It's incredible, right? And no one cares. Then the thing is you have a drink at 3. No one cares. You have a drink at 1. You realize no one really cares. It's time to go back to work. And I think that actually what it turns out is that for a lot of people, retirement is they need a long vacation. And about 1 year to 2 years is about a sabbatical or a long vacation. And that's the experience that actually a lot of people are living through.
But it probably is harder to come back the further that you've been away because you lose your contacts, you lose skills.
Well, yes, but you typically what it is, one of the things that's very hard when you're in an organization is you become attached to its ethics, and its rewards and its penalties. Like as a journalism, you do certain things, you get rewarded. You do other things, you don't get rewarded very well. And so part of, I think, why people leave organizations is they have to, what you were saying, who am I, right? So it's not that I'm somebody that is pleasing my boss, or it's not that I'm doing what my organization is doing. Who am I? What do I want to do? So I don't think your skills go fallow very fast at all. I think the important thing is thinking about who are you and what difference do you want to make? And sometimes that really takes taking a break from who you were and where you were to figure out where you want to go.
But beyond that, Ben, the thing about it is no one says you're going back into the same industry.
Right.
That sabbatical, if you get it, is a wonderful time to say, what is it I really want to do now? I really enjoyed working with that nonprofit, working on this issue that's important to me. So let me go see if I can offer them some of my skill sets. I'm a professional, or I have these great skills, or I'm a carpenter. Let me go redo their playhouse. It's falling apart. There are ways in which you can contribute that you could actually possibly turn into a paying job, which is a concern for many retirees now. But that's what Encore is trying to promote. It is, you have a ton of skills. Take them where you think you can put them to work the best, where they actually help others. And that's a double payoff then. You're working, you might eventually get paid, and you're helping others. And I think that for most people, as I said, it makes you feel like you're doing something of value and you're feeling valued. So and you lose your network? I don't think so. You call on them to come out and help. You call the company and say, why don't you sponsor this, whatever we're doing here at this little playhouse? So no, you actually take all of that and you put it to work for the greater good.
I want to add one little piece of that's so on target. And I want to add one little piece. Sometimes it's hard to do that all by yourself. And I'm not suggesting a therapist or suggesting the clergy or the shrink, but I think there's power in conversation groups. To find maybe it's lunch, and maybe it's your book group, but to find like-minded people and have just that conversation, it's very empowering and affirming.
And Helen, you've mentioned that you've helped over 10,000 people who are thinking about retiring. So I'm curious, is there one mistake you've seen people make or something that people should be especially careful about doing?
I think one thing that is, and again, I don't deal with any of the financial side, but I think one thing that people are surprised at is how much time they have, number one. And if they have a mate or partner, how that mate or partner is affected by the soon-to-retire person. That it's not a solo exercise. There are times when he is saying, I can't wait to go into my RV, and we're going cross-country, and she says, but I want to garden and stay with the children, and we had never had this conversation before. this whole business of communicating and what you do with your time and how much togetherness there is and how much separateness there is. And the notion that you don't have to talk about it because that relationship is perfect. I mean, you haven't had to talk about it for 40 years. Why are you going to start now? Yes? It's a new time. And I think it has to be acknowledged as a new time, a new opportunity. And we have to maybe do things different, like talk to one another about some of these issues. But I think people aren't aware that that's a big component. You can have the best retirement plan financially. You can be healthy and fit. You may even have an idea what to do with your future. But if your mate or partner is a problem, the quality of your life will not be as great.
I think that's really important because, if you think about the past 25 years in talking about retirement, the conversation has been dominated by 401k, asset allocation, how much should I have in stocks, how much should I have in bonds, am I well diversified, am I saving enough? And savings is really important, don't get me wrong, but I think part of this is really retirement's thinking about what do you want to do next. And who do you have to talk to? Who do you want to talk to? There's, building off what Ysabel was saying, there's a gentleman, Jake Warner, he founded Nolo.com, and it's a self-help legal organization that's headquartered in the Bay Area. He's very engaged in the environmental movement. And he said, we have these really skilled people. They were in marketing, they were in PR, they show up at our door, they're 65, 70 years old. They say, I really care about the environment, I really care about the Bay Area, and I want to work with you. And he said, we welcome them and we're very happy, but when we put them to work to do something. Then he says, there's some other people, they're 60 years old. They get really engaged, they get really involved. And by the time they're 65, we're on our knees begging them to retire, because we know what they can do, and we have this opening that we want them to take. And so I think a big part of thinking about retirement, planning for retirement, is really about thinking about your unretirement, thinking about your encore career, and who should you talk to, and your network, and your friends, and your colleagues, and people that you think are doing interesting things, and just taking them out. Just as if you're, when you graduated from college, you went out to take people for coffee and say, how did you get to do what you're doing? So if you're in your 60s, you take someone out to coffee. How did you get to do what you're doing? Is this something I want to do? Because one of the things that really struck me in doing my interviews, when you're talking to 60-somethings and 20-somethings, when a 20-something comes to you and they do not want to live in their parents' basement, by the way. They really don't. They want to be earning an income. But they also want to be earning an income that's something that they're proud about, something that they feel good about. And we encourage that idealism. We say, yes, go for something that you feel good about. And so you have the exact same conversations with people that are 60-somethings. They want to earn an income, they want to keep earning an income, but they want to do something that makes a difference. And the only difference between the 60-something and the 20-something is that the 60-something is really aware that time is short. Mm-hmm. And to the 20-something, time's infinity, right?
Ben, I mentioned this to you in our telephone conversation, and I think, we all become these disciples, and we want to run people out there to start doing their thing and becoming part of this encore generation. But there are some people out there who do like cocktails at 1 and 3 and 5 and going to the golf course. And that's what and getting in the RV. That's what they want to do with those golden years that they earned. And I think that we have to be very careful we don't make them feel guilty, because we're all so busy doing something, saving the world, that they didn't jump on the bandwagon. We have to be very careful about that, become the holier than thou kind of people, because they earned that right to make that decision.
Yep. And it does seem part of this American mentality that we can never go on vacation, and we have to work 80 hours a week, and we can never rest and enjoy things.
But I don't think that, really part of this unretirement is most people, there are exceptions, most people aren't looking to work 40, 50 hours a week. I mean, it's really ideally flexibility, it's part-time. Yeah, I do have friends who go off on RVs. I never have gotten this. But anyway, it's going off in the RV.
These days, those RVs are like plush palaces.
Well, that's like, I never thought of this, but now I've met, three drivers who are in their unretirement, and they're driving a car, and, they love it because they make some money and they like talking to people, and you're in a car, and then when it's time to go visit the grandkids or take a vacation, you just call up and say, I'm gone for a month, and they hang up, and then they come back and they start again. And to me, driving a car, that would be like one of the worst things you could possibly do. But that's, people do find things that they really enjoy. And it is important. It is about choice.
And that's
right?
exactly what I was going to say. It really is about choice.
It's choice.
And having the luxury of choice. And so I think that that's the greatest part of this whole path that we're all on, that if we have the benefit of choice, we are truly the lucky ones.
Yeah.
Well, but you mentioned 20-something, and a lot of 20-somethings, they're not really sure what they want to do. I mean, they do want to make a difference in the world, but they're not exactly sure. So I'm curious how many people who are in their 60s know that they want to keep doing something, but they don't know
it's
what
just
they're
as
going
hard.
to do.
I think this is one of the about why I think we had to change this conversation about thinking about retirement is taking really seriously, like we were saying in terms of relationships and couples, is you have to really start thinking about what is I want to do, because yes, you know that you don't have much more time, but sometimes that puts a whole lot of weight on, well, I got to make the right decision. What is it who am I? What is it that I want to do? And so I do think that there are incredible parallels there. It's a very similar conversation, and the difference is I think that you can be a little bit more deliberate about it, and you have a little more experience you can draw on. But the big thing is to draw on your community, draw on your friends, draw on your conversations.
Go back to school. There's a lot of that happening now as well. I think that besides the Encore.org career handbook, which has many examples of this very same kind of conversation, how do I figure it out? What do I do? How do I get started? Not everybody's going to run out and start a nonprofit. You might want to work with someone at a nonprofit where you really love the cause. So it isn't about overtaxing yourself about this. I think if we then it becomes another job. It's a big process. So I think you can sort of let it happen. For me, like I said, it just happened. I saw the light. I heard it. In fact, I guess 2 years into my first nonprofit, I said, oh, God, this was the point. I was supposed to bring all my skill sets, my networks, my talents, my passion, and put it to work for this population that's underserved. But one of the things I would recommend if you'd like to do, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, it's called the Authentic Happiness. It's a website. It's run by, I believe he's a therapist Thank you very much. And it's like 160 questions that you do, or 442. When I first started it, I thought, but this is asking me the same thing, because I took it. A life coach friend of mine told me to do it. And I went over and over the same questions, and then I finally realized they really wanted to winnow down that they were getting to that which made me authentically happy. And they tell you the number one thing that makes you authentic. I think they give you several, but they told you the number one thing that made you authentically happy. And my number one thing that made me authentically happy was helping people. And I thought, that's not me. My sister says I'm selfish. But then I realized in the journalism business, that was part of what I wanted to do. Keep people informed so they could help themselves or their communities or address an issue. And then when I did this, it was something I realized it wasn't even a choice for me. I felt compelled to do it. I had to do it. And when I took that test, I said, now I realize it. I didn't even really know it myself, and that test said to me, yep, that's you. So I recommend that you take the test.
Let me add another group that doesn't get mentioned in the conversation.
Okay, right.
Because we're all boomer-oriented, okay? The youngest is 50, the oldest is 68. There is this generation before the boomers called the silent generation that is the smallest cohort of all the generations, so that when they did something, it didn't make as much noise. But the silent generation was the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and that there are people, men and women, in that silent generation that strongly identify with these boomer values. And so I'm just suggesting we broaden our conversation to say, it's not up to 68. There are people 75. There are many others. But the silent generation, with its label, gets not only silent, but they disappear. So I just say let's include some of those prior generation folks.
Good. Well, I want to open it up to questions because I'm sure you all are eager to engage our fabulous panel tonight. So Janice is going around with a microphone. And again, please keep your questions general. If you have specific questions, our panelists might answer them after when they're signing their books. But for the sake of our group discussion, please keep it as general as possible. But who wants to start? Just put up a hand and Janice will come around to you. Oh, yes. Let's start over here, sir.
Hi. I know you mentioned the idea of it being, retirement's already a big issue, but this seems to me to even be broader than that in the sense that there really is career and the way that we're looking at careers as a society. And I wanted to get your input on that, but I also wanted to make a note that for a resource, one of the organizations I've been in, because I've been through an unplanned layoff and a 2-year transition in my early 50s, is an organization I've been involved in called Executive Service Corps in Southern California. They provide nonprofit consulting services, so I would just make a pitch for anybody in the room who wants to know about that. Great resource, and you can do a lot for nonprofits. But I just want to get the panelists' comments about whether it really is that sort of, okay, in 20 or 30 years, we're going to find that the millennials are going to be saying, okay, because my parents learned all of these things, I'm looking at my career completely differently from day one. From 20, I'm going to look at a career differently.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting aspects of this, because if we're going to be working longer, and whatever that means, right, whatever form that comes, phased retirement, bridge jobs, I think that has an enormous impact on how a younger generation thinks about their career over a lifetime, and realizing that we have this unfortunate. We sort of had this image, and our language does kind of fail us because we talk about a career, right? So that's you work really hard for 30 years, and then you retire. But what happens really for most people is there's a lot of ups and downs, and sometimes you work really hard, and sometimes you're not working as hard, or you're unemployed, and you go through multiple transitions. And I think for the younger generation, the notion that you're going to be working longer opens up a lot of opportunities. And then it says, okay, I can go back to school and pick up some extra skills because I want to work over here for a while. And now I want to work in a different sector of the economy. Because when I graduated from college, which was not quite the dark ages, but when I graduated from college, basically the way our conversation was, there were some people who were going to go work for the for-profit sector. Some people are going to go work for the government. Some people are going to go work for nonprofits. And there's a few people over here that are going to do this entrepreneurial thing, which none of us actually understood what's going on. Now when you talk to the younger generation, they're not talking that way. So I might do a little entrepreneurial thing for a while, then I might go work in the for-profit sector, then I might go work for a nonprofit. And so I think it's really opening up the notion that you can be much more experimental, take bigger risks, and that you are going to embrace doing multiple things. And sometimes work is going to be the most important thing that you're doing because you love your colleagues, you love the product, you love the challenge. And then at other times you're going to step back and say, no, I want to focus on some other things. And that's one of the really exciting aspects, the opportunity that is opening up for a lot of people, I think.
So people didn't want to become entrepreneurs at Stanford? That's
back then. Yeah, it was a different era.
Very different. And I think that what happens is that they'll also see a lot of modeling going on, their parents and even their grandparents who are still engaged, and that will be a positive thing for them to see. But conversation is so important. As you can tell, in this country, we're not talking to each other to some extent, if you listen to the politics of it. And so you can see that civil conversation has died in this country, it seems. And so this is another conversation that needs to be had, because so many people, when they think of retirement, they think of aging. When they think of aging, they think of dying. And we don't talk about that. So we're afraid to even reach, and you may hear this in some of the conversation that you've had, we're really afraid to move towards those other years, and we need to have that conversation with younger people, And so I think that if you can model that you can live a fruitful, passionate, healthy life well into your 80s, or Vin Scully and all those guys, Betty White, that you're watching people do something well in life, living it to its fullest. And I think that younger people will see that and really appreciate it, and it'll change their life.
Great. Next question over here.
Good evening. My name is Vernon Nickerson, and I happen to be 55 and very proud of that fact. Anecdotally, within my own family, what I saw is those of the silent generation who did the conventional work really hard, buy homes in the South, died. What I also have experienced is those in my family, for example, my 83-year-old mother and my 75-year-old aunt, who are living together and sharing a home, who remained active. My mom was a nurse, and she wound up going back to do a seminar because of the way that people didn't exactly treat my dad when he was in hospital dying of cancer. And then my aunt, who was an educator and a counselor, who then proceeded to do that at the college level after having done it. But what I've seen then for those who stayed engaged in some way or form is that their lives have been extended. Is anyone talking about, and I think this is particularly relevant for those of us who are not Caucasian, the fact that continuing to remain engaged is actually helping our health, helping our longevity.
Oh, absolutely.
And withdrawing is actually a detriment to our health. I mean, that's what I grew up with. And for me, I had an aha moment in 1981, being among the first class of Northwestern engineers to graduate, and every single person did not have a job.
Wow.
And so it was like, okay, this is not going to be what I was told it was going to be. And so thankfully, I had that moment then, which I think has helped me in the present. But the question is, are we talking about, for minorities specifically, the fact that disengaging is hazardous to your health and remaining engaged is longevity, regardless of how that engagement goes?
Go ahead, you go first. Well, first of all, I brought all the materials here, all of the researchers that are looking at healthy, long lives, and that they're very productive, and being socially engaged helps you stay younger, you feel valued. It is those who withdraw who become isolated, and many of those infirmities will take over. But I think that in minority communities, there's so much struggle just to stay employed long term that there is not that great opportunity to consider withdrawal. So basically you work yourself to death. But I think we have to have this conversation in the minority communities to talk about that they're part of this opportunity and this movement, and more so importantly because it is important to their health. Because I think that, unfortunately, in the Latino community and the African American community, there is way too much unhealthy lifestyle that really, and yet we live longer. Latinos live longer, and so do African Americans live longer. So something's going on. But yes, we have to have that conversation, and I try to have it at least in the communities in which I engage.
Yeah, and I think this applies regardless of race or ethnicity, that there's strong evidence that engagement is a very positive piece for longevity and for fulfillment. But when you think of what engagement means, I mean, there's this notion of use it or lose it. So if you're engaged, it means you're having a dialogue. It means you're probably moving your body, right? You're meeting somewhere, maybe for coffee or maybe somewhere else. There is a model of successful aging that was advocated and actually part of a book called Successful Aging by John Rowe and Robert Kahn. And there were 3 components to successful aging, and engagement was one of them. One is to avoid risk factors for disease and disability. Another is cognitive and physical engagement. And the third is productive or meaningful life. And I think that's across all groups. And engagement was very much part of what successful agers had in common. So it's a really important point, something we need to live by.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Next question. Anyone else?
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Joanne Webb, and I'm in the career field, actually, and this is all very interesting to me because what we're seeing a lot of is it's a two-part question that I really have. One is that I can recall as a child that if the way the system is set up, as far as getting your Social Security and pensions, is it kind of expected you were going to die by the time you were 70 at that time, and people did. I mean, if you made it to 70 when I was a kid, you were old, and now, it's like a new beginning,
Spring chicken.
Spring chicken, right. Spring, summer, fall, whatever, chicken. But I think the other piece that I feel that is really important is community. Because I think the lack of work, what it does create is a level of isolation, and especially in a town like Los Angeles, where if you don't have a job and you don't, and you're driving individually in your car, you can spend a lot of time in your head. And I know from having done, we do a boomer boot camp, and one of the things we found was just bringing people together to be able to really talk about, have these conversations. And so that people don't feel so like a three-headed monster, that I'm the only one that feels this way. Yeah. So I would really like to bring that up, is about the whole idea of community. And the other part is education, because a lot of people have had jobs that they were able to get, they got the job, they were able to hand their resume in, it was all fine and good. They didn't even need a resume when they got the job. They just, did an application, they got the job, they stayed at the place 25, 30 years, and those years are not here anymore. How we handle that, how we get people educated. I loved hearing about Obama's idea about the free education with the
junior college.
With the community college, because I think it's a big piece of it. But I just would love to hear your thoughts about community and also education, and getting people trained.
So I think one of the themes that we've all been echoing is the importance of conversation, and that, if you think about older workers who maybe, when they did get their job, they didn't even have a resume, or they went through the resume and the job market has really changed. But I also think it's that, where you're going to get your next job, your next opportunity in unexpected ways through people you know. And so, yes, I think this notion of community, a lot of that, and it's going on around the country. And this is why this is so much of a grassroots conversation that is happening. It's really, it's not really happening in Washington, D.C., for example. It's not happening in a lot of state capitals. They're talking about this whole issue in a very, very different way. But on a grassroots level, I do think that this sense of conversation that I think all of us are echoing, and you're networking and reaching out and trying to engage people, and that's how you're going to get your job, or that's how you're going to figure out what you're doing. And so whenever someone says, how am I going to deal with this? What does this really mean? It's about reaching out and talking to a lot of people and doing your research and finding out. And talking to people sitting and doing research is having a coffee with somebody that you are interested in what they're doing, that you want to find out more about.
And when she mentioned boot camp, and I was thinking, well, maybe just go from senior center to senior center and arrange conversations and start talking about the issue. Because, the fact of the matter is that a lot of seniors who are sitting there think they don't have any talents, or they don't have any opportunity, or they don't know what to do with themselves. And I'm thinking that if you put it on the table and say, how about us all going back to school? Let's go down to the junior college and sign up for a computer class, or whatever community colleges have where they give free adult education, and just challenge them to reach out beyond their own expectation of themselves. But I think just going from we go to senior centers and educate them about breast cancer and other issues. And when I beta tested our education in New York, one of the mental health workers came to me and said, this is fabulous for seniors because it makes them engage. They stop being isolated. It's cognitive because they have to think and put pinto beans in their cards and so on and so forth. So it was really getting them, pulling them out of themselves. And I think there's a good job for one of you who loves working with seniors.
And here's an idea to use our group this evening. Perhaps after this program is over, find one person you don't know, exchange some information, and use this opportunity to network. We've got 140 people here interested in the topic, so make sure you talk to one person you don't know. Maybe you'll have coffee with them.
Great idea. All right. Yes.
Maureen and I work for an organization called Engage, and we provide programs to low-income senior housing around Southern California. Helen, you brought up the subject of males being engaged. We do very well with the women of all cultures, but the men are really difficult to kind of coax out and to just to let us open up the possibilities to them. I would love to hear from our panel if you have any ideas of how we can get the men to engage.
And maybe this will be applicable to the rest of life, too. I don't know.
Maybe disguise the topic. We're going to have a discussion on the economy, maybe, or sports, maybe the Super Bowl. And then maybe we say to the group, any other things that you'd like to talk about now that we're all together? You know, I read something about this book on unretirement. Anyone read that? And maybe we have to do this subtly. First, get their attention. Talk about something that people are interested in and not defensive, things you love, you know, the socio-political storm. And then maybe introduce something else. I think the marketing, the packaging, the language is very critical. And I think that, to me, the larger question is, why the resistance?
Well,
why the resistance?
Well, having worked with the Latino community for, 10, 12 years, I call it my laboratory, actually. But I said the number one risk factor for Latino males is being male. Because they're stubborn, they're not going to listen. They're going to, as my son said from the military, they're going to suck it up if they feel badly, and so on and so forth. But about 6 months ago, because we couldn't get them to show up, cancer patients to show up for our support groups, usually they were surrounded by women, right? I said, let's do something for the men. So I got some men together, and we got a group of them. Some were survivors, some were in treatment, some were parents of kids with cancer. But they all had that similar issue, cancer. So we did put the issue on the table. And we said to them, tell us how we can help you. And do you like this thing called a support group? Or what would you call it? But anyway, we had it was all male. We had no women in the room. We invited them for an hour. They were there for 3. Mm-hmm. And before they walked out the door, they were going out to recruit others to come to the next support group, which unfortunately, because I had to get some funds to do it, I put off for 3 months, but hopefully I'm going to launch next month. But there's something about bringing them in the room with themselves to engage. I think that makes that difference. For men, they've got to find their comfort level. And sometimes it has to be, and I thought about offering, let's do it around a football game. But no, they were ready to engage in the topic, and it proved that they were sincerely wishing to talk about it. But it was, I think, how you establish the setting. So I think you need to provide that opportunity, and you need to let them lead it.
I think that's key.
And then get out of their way.
If you can get a leader, distinguished person in the community, and use language which is appealing, and I think in your case, support group works. Not in this case, it's not a retirement support group. No. It might be a conversation group on the next chapter in life. So the language becomes important. And I think there is a group called the Life Transition Group of about 25 professional, highly accomplished men who get together monthly to just talk about the future. So I think it's changing slowly, but I think we have to be strategic in our approach.
So as a member of the male species, yes. I do think that things are changing somewhat. And part of everything, if you think about the younger generation and with their children, men are much more involved these days. And it's you know it anecdotally, but it's also now in the data. And it's pretty strong in the data. The trend is really there. I think that we are emerging from our caves, and we are engaging more in this conversation. But I do think, and it is pretty clear that in the vanguard of this whole unretirement, of this whole encore, of the conversation that we're having, that women are in the vanguard. And this is the first generation of highly educated career women who are facing retirement. That has never really happened. Women have always worked, but this is the first where women have had a career and are retiring. And some of the things that, and I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but some of the things that I think that were a real negative during their careers that held them back turned out to be incredibly real assets in rethinking this last third of life, in and out of the job market, networking, looking at the job and less the title. I mean, things that you sort of had to do become a real asset in rethinking this. And for many more men who are involved in this, they did what they did, right?
I call it survivorship.
Right, and so now what you got to do is rethink it and be much more flexible, and that's a real transition.
Yeah, and I think in general, men's careers may be more linear.
Yeah, I think.
And women's careers are up and down, following actually the man around the country to different jobs. Although that's going to change because I think the men are following the women around the country now. But I think that's a real difference.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jeff, and wonderful group tonight. So many of you have great stories of individuals, and that is the American way of sort of rugged individualism, but particularly people that are a little less, don't have as much initiative. I was wondering if you'd had any good groups that kind of help to engage older people, and indeed even people in nursing homes, where there may be some limitations, but they would love to be engaged with the next generation and finding meaning in that way, and wondered if you had any good examples or organizations for that kind of a thing.
Good.
So I think that there, if you're thinking about nursing homes, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that are arising, trying to bring high school students together with people in a nursing home, and writing down stories. A lot of storytelling going. This is a big part of it. A lot of music. So there's some sort of exchange going on. But the storytelling aspect and these nonprofits that are growing about bringing younger generation into some of these aged homes and having, what your life was like and what did you learn and what did you do? And it's incredibly eye-opening. I think Encore.org is a very good organization in terms around the country for people who are trying to, I would like to get into this sort of nonprofit sector. I would like to try and give back, but what does that mean? And they're providing, it's a resource for you can go to and you can find out an organization in your area. The Women in Transition Network for professional women 50 and above, that's moving in a number of cities. So again, the unfortunate thing is you can't Google and come up with here are the 5 places you want to go. This is all over the lot. There's all this experimentation. There's all this going on. So, but it's like you reach out to Encore.org or the Women in Transition Network or one of these nonprofits working in the nursing homes, and that opens up a door. And then you talk to some people and you find out somebody else that's doing something. So it's incredible how much energy. And de Tocqueville really was right. We do love associations. We may pride ourselves on our individualism, but the fact is we're a country of associations. So and I think that's exciting, and that's to attach yourself to. But again, I think it's like you find one thing, and then you learn about other things that people are doing.
Great. Well, I think we will end on that note and give you some time to mingle with our panelists a little bit. I want to thank Janice, who produced tonight's program, and also all three of our panelists, Chris Farrell, Ysabel Duron, and Helen Dennis. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.